Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Anne Ostheimer, the representative of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung at the United Nations here in New York, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to our panel discussion on women in foreign policy. The discussion will be translated into German, and you will find the interpretation button on the bottom of your Zoom menu bar. To have an inclusive event, we also provide for the first time sign language translation. As mentioned in our invitation, the decisive point of departure for this panel discussion has been the publication edited by German Member of Parliament Elisabeth Motschmann called Female Diplomacy, but the male and female written in capital letters. Also, we have seen strong women leaders all over the world in past decades. We have to admit that foreign and security policy often remains a male-dominated domain. When women are called into cabinet, they are often fobbed off with soft portfolios of social and family affairs, education, or environment. But women can make a difference, particularly in peace negotiations, be it on local or on top level. Women go for the cause and also restrain their own ego. I personally find it quite striking that it has been a woman who managed to bring conflict parties in Libya to the negotiating table just recently, and after her male predecessor had left his position out of frustration. It is therefore an honor and a pleasure to have with us today 4 strong voices of women who live the daily battles of staking their claims in foreign policy. But it is also important to bring into these kind of discussions the male perspective. We will only achieve real progress if we change the mindset of men and by generating the support needed to break up traditions, barriers, and the famous glass ceilings. So for today's discussion, I would like to welcome Elisabeth Motschmann, member of the German Parliament and member of the CDU Executive Board since 2012. Elisabeth Motschmann is a member of the Committee of Foreign Affairs and also a member of the following bodies of the Bundestag: the Franco-German Parliamentary Assembly, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Honorable Motschmann brings along a distinguished profile in foreign affairs and managed to convene a really formidable group of women in foreign policy for the publication of Female Diplomacy. One of these co-authors is Nora Müller, who is our moderator today. Nora Müller is the head of international affairs at Kerber Foundation in Germany, where she also established the Kerber Middle East Dialogue. It is also an honor and pleasure for me to introduce to you the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora of the Republic of Kosovo, Teuta Saatkia. Minister Saatkia is not only an experienced diplomat who has served until July last year as the ambassador to the UN here in New York, she has also been a member of parliament where she served as president of the Women Cross-Party Caucus and led the fight against male-dominated institutions and society. Welcome, Teuta, back in New York. And for those of you who are following the Afghan peace process and negotiations with the Taliban, the future of women's rights is of utmost importance. We therefore highly appreciate that Ambassador Adila Ras, the permanent representative of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, shares with us today her own experiences as a female diplomat who previously also served as Deputy Minister for Economic Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and as well in the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. Welcome, Ambassador. And last but not least, I would like to welcome and thank Ambassador Günther Sauter, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative in the German mission to the UN and also Vice President of the Executive Board of UN Women. In this function, Ambassador, you will certainly have to position this UN body strategically and lead the battle for a transformation of institutions into inclusive institutions, as Secretary General Antonio Guterres phrased it on Monday in his opening remarks of CSW 65. Thank you so much for sharing your tight agenda with us. And we are aware that you will have to leave early and you have to rush to the next meeting at the General Assembly, but thank you very much for making some time available. So with this short introduction of our panelists, I would like to provide also some housekeeping rules. As mentioned before, interpretation channels you will find at the bottom of the Zoom menu bar. And in order to make this event really inclusive, we have the sign interpretation. And as we are currently using a lot of interpretation in our Zoom seminars, we also would like to do a short survey at the end of our event. So please participate and give us a feedback. This discussion will be recorded and the recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. So you can also share it with friends and colleagues later on. If you have questions and comments which you would like to address to the panelists, please write them in the Q&A box. Our moderator, Nora Müller, will take them up in the course of the discussion. And for those of you who are interested in a hard copy of the publication of Elisabeth Motschmann, please send us a note. We have some copies in our office and we are happy to share them with you on a first come, first served basis. And with these remarks, I wish all of you an interesting discussion, and I hand over now to our moderator, Nora Müller. Thank you.
Andrea, thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here, although I'd much rather be with you in person in New York, of course. But also thank you to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for putting this important issue on our agenda today. And without ado, as they say, let's get this started. And Elisabeth Motschmann, I wanted the two of us to start this conversation. When I prepared for our conversation today, I've come across an interesting quote by Claire Booth Luce, who was an American diplomat, politician, and author. And she said that diplomacy is a feminine art. Now, honestly speaking, I've always been wondering whether there is such a thing as female diplomacy or female foreign policy. So my question to you would be whether in your book, you found an answer to that question.
Sie ist stumm geschaltet. She's muted.
So that we can hear you.
I would prefer to speak German because I have to explain and then
I would prefer to speak German, she says, in case you're listening to the English channel. Thank you very much for this introduction. Yes, I believe that the world is giving away much competence of female diplomacy. I am convinced that women are playing a very important role in diplomacy in terms of building bridges, in terms of creating peace. They can play a very important role. Too few women, however, are working in this area. And we as Germans are perhaps in an easier position than women in Afghanistan, but I can say clearly those who are sitting in the glass house should not be throwing stones. Here with us also, we have too few women in foreign policy. We have never had a female foreign minister. We had 3 women from the CDU and CSU parties in the Committee for Foreign Affairs out of 15. In my first mandate, I was the only woman, and that hasn't been very long, 2013, in my first term in office. Altogether, we had 17 foreign ministers of 193 nations. And only 18% of German ambassadors in foreign countries are women. You can see from that we are giving away we are wasting this resource. This treasure that the world has, women, because women are good, nobody disputes that. Women are good in diplomatic actions, and we know that contracts, for instance, that have been negotiated by women are often more sustainable. There are studies that prove that. And here you also have to say that women are not sitting at the negotiating table. 13% of the negotiators are women in foreign us, and there also we are wasting many chances for peace, for building bridges, for having us, I don't know how long I can speak.
also say that, you know, women form half of the population, so that is reason enough for them to be entitled to have their fair share of power, whether they are good diplomats or not so good diplomats. Is that an argument that resonates with you, that per se women should be entitled to their share of foreign policy, of diplomacy, no matter what?
Of course. In the meantime, I've become a feminist in a certain way, and I am for quotas. I am for parity in all functions of society. When I was young, I was very much against quotas or even parity. But in the meantime, I see that nothing is happening on a voluntary basis, or too little is working, even with us. We are not world champions. And if you think that women have a different look at problems in the world than men, at least when you look at the focuses, they're looking at what about poverty, what about hunger, what about children, what about health? Those are those are important questions. And I like to see when in foreign countries, kids are doing in the schools, because then I know how the country is doing. Then I know, when I know how the women are doing, then I know how our country is doing. Too often when we talk to official representatives of countries, we are being told what is being done, what is working well. And I am honestly not very eager to have these conversations, because I can give those speeches, I can read those speeches that the heads of states and presidents are giving. When I was in Africa with Frank Steinmeier, where these heads of states were speaking, I didn't think that was very exciting.
You get the real picture. That's the argument. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, Elisabeth Motschmann, and thanks for raising it. Let me turn it over to Adela Raz, who is, as was mentioned in the beginning, the first ever female Afghan ambassador to the United Nations. And Adela, I followed what you've been saying in recent weeks and months, and what struck me was that you've been warning the international community to pay very close attention to the way the Taliban deal with the issue of women's rights in Afghanistan. And just in brackets, I think it surprised not only me, but many of us, that not the Taliban, but the current Afghan government issued a decree banning girls above the age of 12, I think, from singing in public. And that leads me to the question whether you are concerned that all the achievements that have been made in the past, almost 2 decades when it comes to advancing women's rights in your country, are you concerned that they're in danger of being lost? And I mean, what can a female leader like yourself do to stop that trend?
Thank you, Nora, for this really important conversation and this important question, and as well, Andrea, for putting together this discussion. And I'm so honored to be among the distinguished panelists, to see my dear friend, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Kosovo, and as well as be here with Madam Elisabeth Motschmann. I think the work she has done is an inspiring step for so many women around the world. I wanted to address the first, the most important part which you raised, and it is a concern for so many of our friends and allies and friends of Afghanistan and friends of women of Afghanistan, in terms of what you've heard to be the recent degree and clarity by the Ministry of Education on girls not being able to sing above the age of 12 at school. I just wanted to clarify that there was a formal statement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Education, clarifying that that was not the position of the minister or the leadership of the ministry. It was the position of a directorate in Kabul that they had issued that letter. And the letter is investigated. There is a team working on it to identify why it was issued, because that is not the position of the government, because there is no way the constitution gives the full and equal freedom to every Afghan citizen, regardless of the gender, regardless of the ethnicity, regardless of the language, or regardless from which ethnic group we come, because Afghanistan is a very diverse society. We have religious minorities, we have ethnic minorities, and of course, half of our population are women. But the constitution gives all of us equal right. It doesn't discriminate us. And that's where one of the major achievements of Afghanistan in the last 20 years is the type of constitution we have, which is truly one of the unique ones in the region, where Islam is respected, but at the same time, there is the civil rights element that's truly incorporated into the constitution.
And still, you yourself have been voicing concerns about the future of women's rights in your country.
Exactly. So I wanted to say that the current stage of the formal position of the government, now coming in what do we see in the future that might happen, the volatility that exists, the fear that are there. I mean, these are true fears. These are not just built up assumptions that women make in Afghanistan. Today, we are at a very critical juncture of our history, as most of you are following. We are sitting across the table from Taliban to negotiate a peace agreement. And this is a group that most of you know them for the type of regime or rule they established in Afghanistan, where women were banned from going to school. I was in Afghanistan at the time when Taliban was ruling, and I couldn't go to school for 5 years because I lived in Kabul. They came to Kabul and they ruled for 5 years, but the entire country for 7 years. So for 5 years, I couldn't go to school. Women were not allowed to go to work. Women were not allowed to be outside without a male companion and chaperone with them. And that was the type of society we lived. And here, this is truly actual fear, because this is the same group with that mentality. And even sometimes I say, if we clearly look into the statement they do make a statement and they say, look, we do believe in the rights of women, but according to Islam. And that's the same thing what the Constitution of Afghanistan says, that because the Constitution, the first line says that Islam is above the law, the civil law, but the Constitution has a very clear protection for rights of women, because Islam does allow women to be educated, to be businesswomen, to be in the forefront of the society. But their definition of Islam, the way they interpret, is where grayness arrives, and that position has not changed by Taliban yet. So it's very clear. Look, at the negotiating team, Taliban at their negotiating team has no single woman.
I was just about to ask you about that fact, Adela. I think the UN Security Council just last Friday called for full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in the intra-Afghan peace process. So, are you optimistic that this is going to happen anytime soon?
Look, if women are included, then I am optimistic. Right now in the
no, I mean exactly. I meant the inclusion of women, not
inclusion,
not the process itself. Yeah.
Yes. So as of now, the negotiating team that's represented, that represents the Republic, there are 4 women, and of course, as a woman, I wanted more than 4. Because that's not the right or the fair number. We make half of the population women. Why 4 of us are there? But 4 took a hard struggle, and colleagues here at the UN knows we worked extremely hard. We advocated for, we worked with the UN, and we tried to pressure all the political elites in the country, because this was an inclusive team, meaning the government was introducing its delegates. plus the political elites in the countries were also introducing their delegates. And of course, political elites arrived with introducing no women, all men. And we had to go back and fight with them saying, no, bring women to the table as well. Right now, we do have 4 very strong women, very competent women, but would they be included in all the processes? I think it's a big question, because we see various discussion happening, new developments are happening in the ground, and the initial indications are not so promising in terms of women, that women would be on those discussions. And not only women, youth, another majority of Afghanistan, with that makes 75% of the population, they're not part of the discussion. Civil society, I think another bright reality of Afghanistan is that today we have a very vibrant civil society there, with the statement or the decision that had a directorate in Kabul had made. That directorate in the ministry were truly scrutinized by civil society and asking the reasons why. So this is where we are. It's a proper and actual vibrant population and generation in Afghanistan that includes women, youth, and civil society that is taking truly the responsibility in their hand, but at the constant barriers that they have. And those barriers are existed initially from the type of society was established over the years of war. 40 years of conflict is not easy. There were times elites ruled and they came to power not because they listened to the public, but because they had the guns. And I think that is changing. That's changing, and it's a positive change, and it needs to be energized, it needs to be supported, it needs to space needs to be given.
Sorry, Adida, for interrupting you. I wanted to interrupt you because that's a perfect lead over to Ambassador Günther Sauter, who has to leave this conversation a little bit earlier, I understand. And since Germany, during its membership in the UNSC, has put so much emphasis on the issues that you were just mentioning, namely women, peace, and security, Ambassador, I wanted to ask you for an assessment of how you see what Germany has achieved during those 2 years of membership in the UNSC when it comes to the women, peace, and security agenda on a scale from 1 to 10. How satisfied are you with what has been achieved?
Laura, thank you very much for bringing me in. First of all, let me say it really changes the atmosphere in the discussion when there's not 5, 6 guys with ties around the table, but a number of very distinguished women and just one guy with a tie. And I think this shows how important the matters are that we are discussing. On your question, I believe that yes, we have achieved quite something on women, peace, and security. Not the least, we have managed to negotiate Security Council Resolution 2467, dealing with women who have suffered sexual violence in conflicts. But you were specifically asking, Nora, how satisfied am I? Frankly, I'm not very satisfied. The big picture here is that regarding gender equality and women's rights, unfortunately, we are far away from where we should be at this point. The situation has been aggravated through the COVID pandemic over the past 12 months. And over the past years, we have also suffered here at the United Nations from what I would call a true anti-gender campaign, which has had very vocal proponents both here in the United States and in many other places all over the world. Now is really the time for what I would like to call a gender parity surge. Now is the moment to, forgive me the language, kick some ass on the question of gender parity. And that goes for many areas. That goes for the security policy part of this, right. It's very important that we just talked about Afghanistan. I just want to say, we have been engaged in Afghanistan for 2 decades now. And if there is one thing that we need to defend, it is the existing constitutional order, which maintains and protects the right of women and girls in Afghanistan. So we need to continue to make progress on these issues, but there is a very broad range of other gender issues that we need to make progress on in the framework of the United Nations. I think the big headline for that is really participation in peace processes, in the discussion on climate change, in economic life, and so on and so forth. And there is a lot to do here.
And there's also a lot to be done still at home. What sort of stuck in my mind was a proposal by the Austrian foreign minister, the former Austrian foreign minister, Ursula Plasnik, who is also a co-author of Elisabeth Motschmann's book. And she said that in every foreign ministry, there should be a department or a directorate which deals with women in international politics. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong, Ambassador, but to the best of my knowledge, there is no such thing in the German Foreign Office, right? Should there be from your point of view?
The answer is yes. Elisabeth Motschmann has just pointed out that if you want to have a credible position on women's rights and on gender parity at the international level, you have to start with your homework at home. This is a political issue, first of all. So this has to do with how many female parliamentarians do you have, how many female members of the government do you have, and so on and so forth. But it's also, let's call it, a technical issue. Speaking about the German Foreign Office, I belong to those who believe we should have such a unit dealing with gender mainstreaming. To do justice to colleagues in Berlin, we do have something like that. My view is it should be a stronger unit. But what we have done last year was to publish the first report on how we deal with gender as a foreign policy issue. And this had 2 dimensions. First of all, we created transparency on the situation inside our foreign ministry. Elisabeth Motschmann has just pointed it out. We just have 20% of ambassadorial positions filled with women. And we can't be satisfied with that. We need to work on that. We are working on that. We are making progress, but it's too slow. And the other dimension is what we just referred to in the discussion. That is really gender, women's rights as the substance of German foreign policy. We hope here at the mission at the United Nations in New York that we are doing quite a lot to push that with the wonderful team that we have on this issue, which consists only of women. In the framework of the CSW right now, where we're negotiating very toughly on the final document in the framework of UN Women, and also during the past 2 years in the framework of the Security Council. So this is also something that is part and parcel of German foreign policy. And here too, it's part of the reality that we need to put even more work into.
Thanks very much. And since we still have you with us, Ambassador, let me throw a question from the audience into your court, and I'll read it out to you. Ambassador Sauter, I appreciate your comment about women outnumbering men in this discussion. I do hope you bring this discussion to the UN. The UN as an organization, despite being one of the biggest advocates of gender equity, does not seem to achieve probing results in advancing this agenda. So a critical sort of footnote to what you've just been saying. Do you want to respond, Ambassador?
Yeah, I believe that this remark is broadly appropriate. There is a lot to do inside the UN. We have just heard in international peace negotiations over the past 30 years, there have been about 10–13% of female negotiators. That shows there's a lot to do. There's a number which I find even worse. 3% of UN peacekeepers are women, 3%. That shows how much there is to do. On the other hand, I believe we have to do justice to the current team at the UN headquarters, to Antonio Guterres' team. They have indeed made quite some progress, increasing the number of women in key leadership positions. So in the UN hierarchy, you have a deputy secretary general, you have a chef de cabinet. So the numbers 2 and 3 in the hierarchy are women. And a lot has been done in order to make sure that also at the other higher echelons of the United Nations system, the number of strong and influential women is increasing. So it's a mixed picture, but no doubt more remains to be done.
Before I bring in Tuta Saad-Shia into the conversation, I'll throw a final question at you, Ambassador, because knowing full well that you'll have to run shortly. But would you go, in your push for gender equality, would you go as far as making women empowerment a precondition for the granting of aid, let's say in the context of developmental cooperation?
Well, this is, thanks to God, already a reality. Let me give you a couple of examples. In the framework of the European Union, the new financial instrument for the funding of developmental projects and stabilization projects already has a quota of 85% of programs which are gender sensitive. In the framework of humanitarian aid in the German Foreign Service, which is now really, if I may say so, a boom business, which has seen massively increasing budgets over the past couple of years, thanks to God. The reality is that about 50% of the programs are gender sensitive, and this is something that is being systematically tracked. And this is something that is a condition for funding. These are just 2 examples that show that mainstreaming can work and that show that it has an effect. But here too, I'm repeating myself, these are good moves. This is where we're going into the right direction here. We shouldn't only look into the input that all of us are producing here as as parliamentarians like Elisabeth Motschmann, as diplomats like Adela and myself, as members of government like Tuta, but we should also look, and we must look at the output. What do we achieve by making these investments? And here, this is what I started with. We cannot be satisfied, and we must face a reality in which on the gender issue, we are not moving ahead in many fields, but we're moving backwards. And this is a very worrying situation, and this is something that must, that we must really take as a call for action.
So on that scale from 1 to 10, which I ask you to grade, this is not more than a 3+, probably?
Well, I'm bad with numbers. I haven't thought about that, but I would say we're certainly very, very far from 10. And I think another number is much more relevant than that. The number is the 2030 number. In the framework of the Sustainable Development Agenda, we have all promised each other that by 2030 we will reach full gender parity, folks, and we are really very, very far away from that. Some smart folks have calculated that if you look at the pay gap between women and men, if we continue at the current pace at which we're making progress, all over the world. It won't take us 10 years or 9 years until 2030, but it will take us about 100 years. So I think that's a very good number, and that shows that we really need to work on the numbers.
A number we should definitely bear in mind. Thank you, Ambassador. Jutta Saichia, finally, let's come to your part of the world. And there I do see some encouraging developments, especially in your country. Kosovo's acting president, in fact, is a woman, Vjosa Osmani, and I think she's also put forward her candidacy to be elected president. So I wanted to ask you, how much of a milestone is this really when it comes to gender equality and to women empowerment in Kosovo, but also in the Western Balkans at large?
Thank you, Nora. But first I want to thank Konrad Adenauer for organizing this. I'm so happy to meet my old New York friends and to meet some new friends. I wish Ambassador Sauter good posting, good work. I didn't have opportunity to meet you while I was in New York, but with German mission, I had really very, very strong cooperation. So yes, we have acting president Vjosa Osmani, who in fact got the biggest ever number of votes in the recent election of 14th of February. She is a candidate for president, so from next week, our new institutions will be formed, parliament, government, and the new president. So if Vjosa Osmani is elected, and I believe that the biggest probability is that she will be our next president, she will be the second woman president of Kosovo. We had first in region a woman president, Atifete Yayagal, who really had passed a great message of Kosovo around the world. And another thing that I want to share with you is that this time we have the biggest ever number of women who got in parliament. They are 36%, and the biggest number of them entered without quota. I share with my, as a former parliamentarian, with parliamentarian Motschmann, I shared that before entering to politics, I was adamantly against quota because everything I achieved, it was because of my ability as engineer, as a businesswoman, as think. But when I entered the politics in 2004, I witnessed that a mediocre man can get more votes than an excellent woman. And then when we introduced the quota, it was every journalist, every man was asking, do you think that women representation will be quantity against quality? And I always responded the same question. Do you think that 70% of men are quality? And of course, that answer stopped that. But every consecutive elections, women in Kosovo started to 50% more win the seats without quota, because quota created that critical mass of women inside the parliament that started the process of women empowerment. And now it is not anymore unusual to see women talking about foreign policy, talking about energy, talking about peace, about security. And I think that quota overcame that millennial work against women. And today we arrived to the situation that the women got the ever biggest number of votes, and she will become our next president. What else? But again, we are not satisfied. And I will respond with some numbers. I'm a little bit good with numbers.
And if as a former engineer, you should be. But let me maybe, before you come to the numbers part, let me add an additional thought for you to consider. We talked a little bit about conditionality already, and when it comes to the requirements for EU accession for at least some of the Western Balkans countries, gender equality and women empowerment is also part of the package. So do you think, I mean, how much has that helped the issue to advance? Did that make a significant sort of change from your point of view?
I think that women representation through quota really increased the visibility of women. And but the real empowerment, I believe, lays within the political parties, because the presidencies of political parties usually are full of men and very few women. And who are political parties? They are those, especially presidencies, who nominate ministers, who nominate prime ministers, who nominate ambassadors, who nominate decision-making positions. And when there is very few women within the presidency of party, then of course men rather nominate other men than a woman. So I think that we should really hard work to promote and to push, maybe quota, maybe another thing, but to push women representation within the political parties, within the presidencies of political parties, because then we ensure that more women there will be more nominations, and women tend to nominate more women rather than men. So I think that if we talk about this representation, we need to work there. And about numbers, from 1 to 5, it is 20% of women representing in Kosovo also and in parliament. And from 1 to 5, it means 1. 1 is 20%. So we are not 3.5, we are number 1. We even didn't go to the 2 because 20% is 1. Unfortunately, we are very, very low.
So there's still room for definitely for improvement there. Adela Raz, I have a question for you from the audience, so brace yourself. But before I go to you, I wanted to come back to Elisabeth Motschmann with one question which refers to, again, to Germany, to our own situation. You already talked about women in foreign policy, or the lack thereof, I should say. And this reminded me of the fact that, of course, we do have a female leader in Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel, but she is just about to leave the political stage in a short while. And since she's a member of your party and you know her well, I wanted to ask you how you see her legacy, but not in general, but when it comes to the issue of women empowerment. What is it that she leaves to us as women? And if you could just unmute yourself.
Angela Merkel hat Großes für unser.
Angela Merkel has done great things for our country. You can't dispute that. And that goes beyond party borders. She has worked very hard in order to not have ideological trench wars so that they're not as intensive anymore. She has greatly brought the CDU in the middle of the political landscape. Some said she went very far to the left, but she's had great election results with many parties at that time. And she has brought the People's Party, CDU, CSU, really as a people's, she has maintained it as a people's party. We're still the strongest party with 30%. Right now we have problems, but between 30 and 40% was where we were. And we were stable in the entire term of office of Angela Merkel. And that's singular. The great Social Democratic Party is stable at 16%, and the Green Party has won over the Social Democrats. So I see Angela Merkel's legacy that she has brought the People's Party beyond very difficult crises. We had a financial crisis, we had the refugee crisis, now we have the pandemic, and she is steering the ship quietly without vainness. She is very factual, sometimes even emotional, but rarely. But I think she does a great job.
Exactly. What about women empowerment and her legacy?
Ja, da hat sie viel später erst.
Yes, that came later, not at the beginning of her term of office, which is understandable. She started to work very strongly in women's affairs. And for us, as members of parliaments and as female fighters in the party at the base, it was sometimes difficult because people would say, "What do you want? You have a chancellor, a female chancellor. What else do you want? And you can't go even further up." Yes, we have never had a female president. But of course, the chancellor position is more powerful, so that they use that to try to quiet us, to silence us. So now they're saying Ursula von der Leyen is EU Commission President, Angela Merkel is Chancellor. You have everything that you want. No, the level below, that's where things happen. That's where there are partially catastrophic images. We've talked about it in terms of the ambassadors. But there are hundreds of men who are state secretaries within the history of the Federal Republic of Germany since the last war. And only, 20 women are among them. We have, of course, we have parliamentarians, but it's very poor talking about, say, department leaders or division leaders. So it thins out where women are working. And those are important positions in our country. In our, those are the people that are responsible for the divisions, that are giving the political guidelines. But the leaders and directors in public office are the kings of their department, whether you're talking about foreign policy or social policy, and they have a lot of power. And that's the gap where we have to go. And if you look at the boards or the chairmanships in the private sector, that's sometimes very
fantastic. And I tried to take a few of them and turn them over to our discussants. And Ambassador Ras, here is one for you by Dr. Winfried Schmidt. What can we in the US, in the international community, do to support women in Afghanistan? ? How many women percentage-wise work presently in the Afghan Foreign Service? And since we don't have that much time left, I wanted to ask all of you to be very crisp and concise in your responses. Adela.
Sure. Thank you. What can you do? You continue to do what you have been doing for the last 20 years. Advocate for women participation in every aspect of the Afghan society. And as my dear colleague said from the Permanent Mission of Germany, is to protect the constitutional rights of Afghan women. There are discussion of amending the Afghan constitution. And one thing that's a red line for women in Afghanistan is Article 21, which protects equal rights for every Afghan citizen. And I think that's the biggest achievement we have made, and that should be protected despite the negotiations and agreements and post-peace agreements. That's what it is. In terms of percentage, we're not exactly where we should be, but there is definitely a greater increase compared to when we were not allowed to work outside, even not then government or foreign service. That was far away a dream. Today we have about 12% of women in the foreign service, about 30% in the civil service overall in the government, and about 50% in politics, which means the local community development shuras, which is truly a very critical step for establishing a democratic structure. About 50% of them are women in the parliament, and they're both upper and lower house. We have about 27 to 28% of Afghan women. And that's a tremendous change. We have now women in private sector, which was an area that was not very well accepted or unusual track record for women to be in the private sector. And today there is a very strong women entrepreneurs. They have a women chamber of commerce and in media. But one thing I wanted to put as a takeaway from this conversation specifically to women in Afghanistan, I do agree that quota is the right system to proceed, at least for societies like ours, where we arrive at a level where it becomes an accepted norm for the society to see women in the forefront in every part of the country. That's one. And second, I think what the international community can do at this stage where Afghanistan is in really a difficult or a critical time is to be more vocal. Today we have a targeted killing specifically. There is a high level of increase of violence against women in media, women in the government, women outside of the government, simply a woman who's vocal, simply a woman who goes outside of her house, she is a target. And it's a very strategic targeted killing because it's truly our hopes, our desire for a prosperous society lies on the younger generation and on women, and they are targeted. Our strength today is targeted in my plea to the international community and all the supporters of Afghanistan as to not accept it because it's unacceptable. We don't accept it. We are vocal about it, but we want to hear that more being stronger from the international community as well, because this is your achievement and it is our achievement. We have seen Afghanistan today in a crossroad of progress that was unimaginable 20 years ago. So 20 years ago seems too long, but it is not too long for a society to arrive where it from the starting point where it was and where it is. So I'm going to stop here. Nora, I know you have more to cover.
Thank you, Adela. Yes, in fact, maybe for the remaining minutes that we still have, and since we talked a little bit about quotas already, there is a comment by Susan Sloan to you, Minister Said Shia, and I'll read it out for you. So she writes, instead of quotas, we can use targets. That's what Australia does in the foreign ministry. Targets of 40% men, 40% women, and 20%. Those percentages create significant cultural change. That's not really a question, it's a comment and a suggestion for you to consider also for your foreign service. What are your thoughts on this?
Whether it is called quota or targets, it is affirmative actions that are needed to reinforce women's position within the institutions, whether it is in diplomacy or other places. Quotas made significant changes because they were obligatory in Parliament of Kosovo. But in other places where there is no obligation of quotas and where is left to targets, to goodwill, to thoughts, etc., things goes very, very slowly. That's why in political parties, although the gender equality law requires the target of 50%, of 30%, now 40% or gender parity, the reality shows that no more than 20% are present there. So I think that some obligation at the beginning will create the fast forward empowerment of women within the political parties, and I believe through political parties they will be more present to government and to other institutions. But I think that parallel with these affirmative actions, so whether it is quota or target, we need to work in women economic empowerment, because when women are economically empowered, then they are less targeted by violence. They are more secure in themselves, and they are more prone to participate and to have voice within the institution. So I think that several kinds of affirmative actions are really needed, because for centuries or millenniums, women were not considered as the same, as the equal with the men. And that's why we need to not to wait 1,000 years more or hundreds of years, but to push with some affirmative actions and to fast forward the gender equality. And that is not because it is good for women, but women participation in every institution is good for the state, is good for that institution, will bring the additional value, will break the stereotypes. As diplomat in foreign country, being a woman means breaking the stereotypes, bringing the soft power. Missions that are led by women are more accountable, are more financially responsive, are more prone to build bridges. So that's why I think that more women in diplomacy, more women in institution is better for the whole society, for institutions, for diplomacy, for the state.
And that is a perfect closing statement for this fascinating conversation. And I still see Ambassador Sauter is with us, so maybe our conversation was so fascinating that he even decided to be late for his next meeting. So without ado, let me thank you all for a great conversation. And without ado, I'll hand it back to Andrea Ostheimer for some final words of wisdom.
Thank you, thank you. I am not sure whether I can comply with the wisdom, but I would like to thank first and foremost our panelists. That has been a very striking discussion. We have touched on many, many points, and thanks also to an excellent moderation by Nora Müller. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. And I think we have brought to the forefront a couple of thoughts that actually should be taken into consideration further on. As Honorable Motschmann said right in the beginning, we are giving away, we are underusing valuable resources of female diplomatic skills. But we also heard from Minister Satkia that political parties are playing a crucial role. And just yesterday, we had a discussion about the role of political parties and how they can engage women further to join their ranks. But we also heard about the importance of economic empowerment of women to bring their independence also in this area. We learned from Ambassador Sauter that we still need to invest a lot into protecting the achievements of the past. And Afghanistan is a classic example where we need to protect the achievements of the last 20 years. Achieving gender parity, it's not a theological process. We can see setbacks. We can see it on international, on national, on local level. But also, as Ambassador Sauter mentioned, for the credibility, particularly on international level, we have to do our own homework. We have to really see what needs to be done on national level back home. And last but not least, we need to monitor closely whether the policies and the good talk are really generating results. Because I think since the big conference on women's rights in Beijing 26 years ago, a lot of talk happened, but what has really changed still remains to be seen. So I think we have touched on a very vast agenda today. Certainly we will continue to raise attention to those topics who are of importance not only to women in foreign policy, but on women's rights in general. And for those of you in our audience who are interested, we have next week another CSW side event on the 24th of March at 9 o'clock this time. It's about women in the judiciary, because even if you look at the judiciary, you will see there is a lack of women. Most courts are dominantly male, and we will have a discussion with female Supreme Court judges from all over the world, including the former vice president of the ICC. So I'm looking forward to see many of you again next week. I thank the audience for your interest, for your engaged commentaries and questions. And a last thank you to also our interpreters, because it's a challenge to interpret into different languages. And please also, our audience, take part in our survey, because we would like to get a feedback. So thanks again, and I wish all of you a nice evening, a nice rest of the day, and hope to see you soon. Bye.